At brunch, my daughter-in-law said, "Christmas is finally going to be peaceful. Without you." I excused myself. That evening, I called the realtor and she received a letter from my lawyer. But let me start from the beginning because what happened that Sunday morning didn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for months, maybe even years, and I had been too blind to see it. I had spent 3 hours that morning preparing everything for our monthly family brunch. The dining room table was set with my grandmother's china, the same set I had used for every special occasion for the past 40 years. Fresh flowers from my garden sat in the center, and the smell of cinnamon rolls filled the house. I had gotten up at 6 to make David's favorite blueberry pancakes from scratch, the same recipe I had used when he was 10 years old and would climb onto the counter to help me measure the flour. The house felt warm and welcoming, just the way it always had when David was growing up. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. Every corner held memories of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and countless family dinners. This was the house where I had nursed him through chickenpox, where he had brought his first girlfriend to meet us, where his father and I had celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary just 2 years before the cancer took him. When David arrived with Stephanie and the kids, I felt that familiar flutter of joy in my chest. My grandchildren, Emma and Jake, were 7 and 5, and they still ran to hug me when they walked through the door. At least some things hadn't changed. "Grandma, can we see the photo albums after breakfast?" Emma asked, tugging on my apron. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, ruffling her hair. "We can look at the pictures of Daddy when he was your age." I caught Stephanie rolling her eyes as she set her designer purse on the kitchen counter. She was wearing one of those outfits that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. All sharp lines and neutral colors that somehow managed to make everyone else feel underdressed in their own home. "Mom, you really don't need to go to all this trouble every month," David said, though he was already reaching for a cinnamon roll. "Stephanie's been saying we should maybe scale back on these family gatherings." My hands paused as I was pouring orange juice. "Scale back?" "Well," Stephanie said, smoothing her perfectly styled blonde hair, "the kids have so many activities now. Soccer, piano lessons, tutoring. It's just getting harder to find time for these big family productions." Family productions. That's what she called our monthly brunches. Not family time. Not tradition. Productions. "I see," I said quietly, continuing to pour the juice even though my hands had started to tremble slightly. We sat down to eat, and for a while, everything seemed normal. The children chattered about school, David talked about his new promotion, and I listened to every word, treasuring these moments when we still felt like a family. But I noticed things too. The way Stephanie checked her phone constantly. The way David seemed nervous, glancing at his wife before he spoke. The way Stephanie's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. "Grandma, tell us about when Daddy was little," Jake said, syrup covering his chin. I was about to launch into one of David's childhood stories when Stephanie cleared her throat. "Actually, kids, we should probably focus on eating. We have that birthday party to get to this afternoon." "What birthday party?" I asked. This was the first I had heard of it. "The Morrison's daughter," David said quickly. "You remember, Mom, I mentioned it last week." But he hadn't mentioned it. I would have remembered. I remembered everything about our conversations because they were becoming increasingly rare. After breakfast, while the children played in the living room and David stepped outside to take a work call, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Stephanie. She was standing by the window, looking out at my garden with an expression I couldn't quite read. "The roses are beautiful this year," I said, trying to make conversation. She replied without turning around. "You know, Margaret, I've been thinking." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "About what?" She turned to face me then, and her expression was carefully neutral, the way people look when they're about to deliver bad news. "About the holidays, Christmas specifically." My heart started beating faster. Christmas had always been special in our family. We had traditions going back generations. The tree decorating party, Christmas Eve dinner, opening presents together on Christmas morning. Even after my husband died, we had kept every tradition alive. "What about Christmas?" I asked. Stephanie leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "Well, David and I have been talking, and we think it might be time for some changes. The kids are getting older and they have friends they want to spend time with. Plus, my mother has been asking when she'll get to host a Christmas. But we always have Christmas here," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "That's exactly what I mean," Stephanie said. And there was something almost pitying in her tone. "You've been carrying this burden for so long. Don't you think it's time to let someone else take over? Time for you to relax and just be a guest for once?" Burden. She called our family Christmas a burden. "I don't see it as a burden," I managed to say. "I love having everyone here. This house has always been the center of our family. Stephanie sighed. The way you might sigh at a child who doesn't understand something obvious. Margaret, I know this is hard to hear, but sometimes holding on to traditions too tightly can actually damage a family. Things need to evolve. People need space to create their own memories. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Are you saying I'm not welcome at Christmas? Of course not, she said quickly, but something in her eyes told a different story. We would never exclude you. It's just that maybe it's time for the immediate family to have some time together. You know, just David, me, and the kids. Christmas is finally going to be peaceful, without you there to worry about hosting and cooking and all the stress that comes with keeping up this big house. The words hit me like a physical blow. Christmas is finally going to be peaceful, without you, the way she said it, like my presence was the thing that had been disrupting their peace all along. I stood there in my own kitchen, surrounded by the dishes I had carefully chosen, in the house where I had celebrated 40 Christmases, and realized that I had become unwelcome in my own family. I see, I said again, because I couldn't think of anything else to say. Stephanie must have seen something in my face because she softened her voice. I hope you understand, Margaret. This isn't personal. We're just trying to do what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone? Apparently, what was best for everyone was for me to disappear. I excused myself and went upstairs to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed I had shared with my husband for 30 years, and felt something inside me break, not just my heart, though that was certainly shattered, something deeper. The part of me that had believed, despite everything, that family meant something. That the love I had poured into David, into this house, into building a life that centered around togetherness, had meant something. I heard them leaving downstairs, heard David calling goodbye, heard the car doors slam and the engine start. They were going to that birthday party I hadn't been invited to, just like I wouldn't be invited to Christmas. I sat there for a long time as the afternoon light faded, thinking about all the things I should have seen coming. The way Stephanie had gradually taken over planning family events. The way she had started making comments about outdated traditions. The way David had started asking her opinion about everything, even things that had nothing to do with her. When evening came, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Janet Morrison, the real estate agent who had sold 3 houses on my street in the past year. The second was to my lawyer, Robert Chen, who had handled my husband's estate. I'd like to put my house on the market, I told Janet, and I need it done quickly. Are you sure, Margaret? She asked. That's a big decision. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said, and for the first time all day, I meant every word. The week after that devastating brunch, I couldn't stop thinking about how blind I had been. Sitting in my living room, surrounded by 40 years of memories, I started to see all the signs I had missed. Or maybe I hadn't missed them. Maybe I had just chosen to ignore them because the truth was too painful to face. It started small, the way these things always do. About 2 years ago, right after David and Stephanie's 3rd wedding anniversary, she began suggesting little changes. Margaret, don't you think the kids would prefer pizza instead of your pot roast for Sunday dinner? She would say with that sweet smile that never quite reached her eyes. Kids these days have such different tastes. I should have said something then. Should have reminded her that my pot roast was David's favorite, that he had requested it every Sunday since he was 12 years old. But I didn't want to seem inflexible, so I started making pizza. The children ate it without complaint. But I noticed David looking disappointed when he walked into the kitchen and didn't smell the familiar aroma of herbs and slowly braised beef. Then came the Christmas decorations. For 38 years, I had put up the same ornaments on our family tree. Each one had a story. The handmade angel David had crafted in 2nd grade, slightly lopsided but treasured. The glass snowflake my husband had bought on our honeymoon in Vermont. The collection of wooden ornaments we had accumulated from family trips over the years. Last Christmas, Stephanie arrived early to help with the decorating. She brought 3 large boxes of new ornaments, all perfectly coordinated in silver and white. I thought we could refresh the tree this year, she announced, already unpacking her pristine decorations. These old ones are looking a bit worn? Worn. She called our family memories worn. But these ornaments have history, I protested gently, holding up David's angel. Each one means something. Oh, we can keep a few of the sentimental ones, she said dismissively, not even looking at the angel in my hands. But don't you think it's time for something more sophisticated? Something that matches the beautiful home you have here? David walked in at that moment, and I looked at him hopefully, waiting for him to defend our traditions. Instead, he glanced at Stephanie's ornaments and nodded. Those look nice, honey. Very elegant. I felt something crack inside my chest. But I smiled and helped hang her cold, perfect ornaments on our tree. Later, when no one was looking, I quietly placed David's angel on a back branch where it wouldn't interfere with Stephanie's design, but where I could still see it. The photo albums were next. I had spent decades documenting our family life, carefully arranging pictures and albums that told the story of our years together. David's first steps, birthday parties, family vacations, graduations. Every milestone was preserved with handwritten captions and date stamps. During one of our monthly brunches, Emma had asked to see the albums, just like she always did. But before I could get them, Stephanie intervened. "Oh, sweetheart, those old photo albums are so dusty and boring. Why don't we look at the pictures on my phone instead? I have much better quality photos of our recent trips." "But I want to see Daddy when he was little," Emma had insisted. "Another time," Stephanie said firmly. "Grandma's albums are very old and fragile. We don't want to damage them." I watched my granddaughter's face fall with disappointment, and I started to speak up. But David was already distracting her with something else. The albums stayed on the shelf, collecting dust that Stephanie had mentioned, gathering neglect that I was too afraid to fight. The guest room was perhaps the most painful change. When David first got married, he and Stephanie would often stay overnight after family gatherings, especially during holidays. The guest room had been my pride and joy, decorated with family quilts and photographs, stocked with David's favorite childhood books and little touches that made it feel like home. About 18 months ago, Stephanie mentioned that they would be staying at a hotel during their next visit. "It's just more convenient," she explained when I asked why. "We can come and go as we please without worrying about disturbing you." But I knew the real reason when she wrinkled her nose slightly and added, "Plus the mattress in your guest room is quite old, and David has been having back problems." The mattress wasn't old. I had bought it specifically for their visits 3 years earlier, but I didn't argue. I just felt another piece of my role in their lives slip away. The weekly phone calls became bi-weekly, then monthly, then only when there was something specific to discuss. David used to call me every Tuesday evening, just to chat about his day, to ask about mine, to share funny things the children had said. Those calls were the highlight of my week. "Mom, I'm so busy with work lately," he would say when I mentioned that I hadn't heard from him. "You understand, right? Stephanie's been handling most of the family scheduling now anyway." Stephanie handling the family scheduling. That should have been my first clue that I was being systematically removed from my own son's life. The final sign I should have recognized was the way David started asking permission. Not from me, but from Stephanie. For everything. "I was thinking of taking Mom to lunch next week," he would say, and then quickly add, "If that's okay with you, honey. The kids want to spend Saturday night at Grandma's house," he would mention, followed immediately by, "But only if you don't have other plans for us." My own son, asking his wife's permission to spend time with his mother. I found old text messages on my phone from David that I had saved because they made me happy. Messages from 2 years ago that said things like, "Can't wait for Sunday dinner, Mom. The kids have been talking about your cookies all week." Messages from last year that were shorter and more formal. "Stephanie says we can make it to brunch this month if it's not too much trouble." The evolution was right there in black and white, and I had watched it happen without saying a word. Sitting in my kitchen that week, drinking coffee from the mug David had given me for Mother's Day 5 years ago, I realized something terrible. I hadn't just lost my place in David's life gradually. I had been deliberately erased. Every tradition altered, every role reassigned, every connection weakened, until I became what Stephanie had always seen me as, an obstacle to her perfect family picture. The most painful part wasn't even Stephanie's manipulation. It was David's compliance. My son, whom I had loved and supported and sacrificed for, had chosen to let it happen. Every time I was excluded, every time a tradition was changed, every time Stephanie made a cutting remark, David had stood by and watched. Not just watched. Participated. He had become a stranger to me, and I hadn't even noticed when it happened. That night, I walked through my house and saw it with new eyes. This wasn't just my home anymore. In Stephanie's mind, it was already theirs. She was just waiting for me to step aside or, more likely, waiting for me to die so she could take over completely. The thought hit me like ice water. She wasn't just excluding me from Christmas, she was positioning herself to inherit everything I had built, everything I had created, everything that had meaning to me. Well, she was about to learn that I wasn't going anywhere. And I certainly wasn't going to make it easy for her. 3 days after my conversation with the realtor, David came by unexpectedly. I was in the garden, pulling weeds from around my roses, when I heard his car in the driveway. For a moment, my heart lifted with hope. Maybe he had come to apologize. Maybe he had finally seen what Stephanie was doing to our family. "Hey, Mom," he said, walking around to the backyard. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he used to do as a child when he had broken something and was trying to work up the courage to tell me. "David," I said, standing up and brushing the dirt off my gardening gloves. "This is a nice surprise." He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit he had never outgrown. "I wanted to talk to you about Sunday, about what Stephanie said." My chest tightened. "What about it?" "She feels terrible," he said, but he wasn't meeting my eyes. "She didn't mean it the way it sounded. She was just trying to say that maybe you deserve a break from hosting, you know? She thought you might enjoy being a guest for once." I stared at my son, this man I had raised, and felt something die inside me. He was making excuses for her. Even now, even after what she had said, he was choosing to protect her instead of me. "David," I said quietly, "she said Christmas would be peaceful without me. How exactly did I misunderstand that?" He winced. "She misspoke. She was under a lot of stress that day." "Stress," I repeated. "What kind of stress was she under at a family brunch in my home?" "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder than it has to be. As if I was the one making things difficult. "I'm not making anything hard," I said. "I'm just trying to understand why my own son is standing in my garden defending someone who just told me I'm not welcome at Christmas." David's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it automatically. I saw Stephanie's name on the screen. Even here, even during this conversation, she was monitoring him. "I have to go," he said quickly, typing a response. "We're picking up Jake from soccer practice." "Of course you do," I said. He leaned over and gave me an awkward hug, the kind of hug you give to distant relatives at funerals. "We'll figure this out, Mom. Everything will be fine." But as I watched him drive away, I knew nothing would be fine. Not anymore. That evening, I was cleaning out my desk when I found David's old phone. He had left it behind last month when he upgraded to a new model, saying he would pick it up later. I had forgotten about it until I found it in the drawer where I kept spare batteries and old chargers. I almost threw it away. I should have thrown it away. But something made me turn it on, just to make sure there was nothing important on it before I got rid of it. The phone still had some charge, and when the screen lit up, I saw dozens of text messages. Most were from Stephanie, and they were recent. From last week. From the day after our brunch. I knew I shouldn't read them. I knew it was wrong, but I also knew that whatever was in those messages might be the truth I had been too afraid to see. I opened the first conversation. "Stephanie, how did she take it?" "David, not great. She looked pretty upset." "Stephanie, I told you she would make it dramatic. She always does." My hands started shaking. "David, maybe we should have been gentler about it." "Stephanie, gentle?" "David, we've been gentle for 3 years. She's not going to get the hint unless we're direct. Christmas needs to be about our family, not catering to a lonely old woman." Lonely old woman. That's how she saw me. That's how she talked about me to my own son. "David, I just feel guilty." "Stephanie, don't. You've done more than enough for her. She's had her time being the center of attention. Now it's our turn." I scrolled up, looking at older messages, and what I found made my stomach turn. From 6 months ago. "Stephanie, we need to start setting boundaries with your mother. The kids are getting too attached to her stories about the old days. It's not healthy." "David, what do you mean?" "Stephanie, she's filling their heads with all this nostalgia about family traditions and how things used to be. They're going to grow up thinking her way is the only way." "David, I never thought about it like that." "Stephanie, trust me. I've seen this before with my friends' families. Overbearing grandmothers who can't let go. It stunts the children's development and undermines the parents' authority. From 4 months ago." "Stephanie, I've been thinking about the house situation." "David, what about it?" "Stephanie, when she's gone, we'll inherit it, right? It's in a great neighborhood. We could renovate it completely, make it modern." "David." "Stephanie, she's not going anywhere anytime soon." "Stephanie, I know, but we should start planning. Maybe we could convince her to downsize now. Move into one of those senior communities. Then we could move into the house and the kids could grow up there." "David, I don't know how she'd feel about that." "Stephanie, she'll resist at first, but once she sees how much happier we all are, she'll understand." I set the phone down and walked to the bathroom, where I threw up. Not from illness, but from the sheer shock of seeing my life discussed like a business transaction. They had been planning my removal for months, maybe years. When I was able to read again, I found messages from just 2 weeks ago. "Stephanie, I think Christmas is the perfect time to make the break. Tell her we're starting our own traditions." "David, that seems harsh." "Stephanie, it's not harsh, it's necessary. She needs to understand that she's not the head of this family anymore." "I am." "David, what if she gets upset?" "Stephanie, let her. She'll get over it. And if she doesn't, that's her choice. But the worst message was from 3 days ago, right after David's visit to my house. David, I talked to Mom about Christmas. I think she's starting to understand. Stephanie, good. How did she seem? David, sad but resigned. I think she knows it's time to step back. Stephanie, perfect. Once we establish this boundary, we can work on the others. Sunday brunches, babysitting, all of it. It's time for her to find her own life instead of living through ours. David, sometimes I feel bad about this. Stephanie, don't. You're protecting our marriage and our children's future. She's had 40 years to be the center of attention. Now it's our turn. Our turn. As if love was something that had to be rationed, as if there wasn't enough to go around. I sat in my kitchen, holding my son's phone, and realized that I didn't just have a daughter-in-law problem. I had a son problem. David wasn't just going along with Stephanie's plans reluctantly. He was actively participating in them. He was discussing my future as if I had no say in it. He was agreeing to cut me out of holidays, to limit my time with my grandchildren, to push me toward isolation. The man I had raised, the boy I had comforted through nightmares and celebrated through achievements, was planning to discard me like I was an old piece of furniture that no longer matched the decor. I looked around my kitchen, at the refrigerator covered with pictures of Emma and Jake, at the cookie jar I kept stocked for their visits, at the chair where David used to sit and tell me about his day. This house wasn't just my home. It was the foundation of everything I had built, everything I had given to my family, and they wanted to take it. Not just the house, but the role it represented. They wanted to erase me from my own life and call it kindness. I placed David's phone on the counter and walked to my bedroom, where I kept my important papers in a fireproof safe. I pulled out my will, the document I had written 5 years ago that left everything to David. The house, my savings, my jewelry. Everything I owned was going to pass to him and, by extension, to Stephanie. She was counting on it. She was planning for it. She was pushing me out of the family so she could inherit what I had built without having to deal with me anymore. Well, she was about to learn that inheritance isn't guaranteed, and that underestimating a grandmother is a very dangerous mistake. I spent the entire night awake, sitting at my kitchen table with David's phone and my will spread out in front of me. By sunrise, I had made up my mind. If they wanted to treat me like I was already dead, then I was going to give them exactly what they were waiting for. Not my actual death, of course, but the death of the woman who had spent decades sacrificing her own dreams so that David could have everything he wanted. The death of the mother who had always put her son's happiness before her own. The death of the grandmother who believed that love and loyalty were reciprocal. That woman was gone, and in her place was someone who finally understood that sometimes the people who take the most from you are the ones who deserve the least. I called Janet Morrison at exactly 9 o'clock that morning. "Margaret," she said, sounding surprised. "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon." "I want to move fast on this," I told her. "How quickly can we get the house on the market?" There was a pause. "Well, I'd need to do a market analysis, take photos, prepare the listing. Usually we like to take a few weeks to make sure everything is perfect." "I don't have a few weeks," I said. "I want it listed by Friday. That's only 4 days away. Are you sure you don't want to take some time to think about this? Selling a family home is a big decision." "I've already thought about it," I said. "For longer than you might imagine." The house was beautiful, and Janet knew it. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, original hardwood floors, a completely renovated kitchen, and a garden that had been featured in the local newspaper's home section 3 years running. It was the kind of house that young families dreamed of buying, and in our neighborhood, houses like mine didn't stay on the market long. "I'll need to price it competitively if you want it to move quickly," Janet said. "Price it to sell," I told her. "I don't care about getting top dollar. I care about getting it sold." After I hung up with Janet, I called Robert Chen, my lawyer. "Margaret," he said warmly, "how are you holding up? I know the holidays can be difficult for widows." "Actually, Robert, I'm calling about my will. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," I said. "I just need to make some changes, significant changes." "What kind of changes?" "I want to revoke the current will entirely and create a new one." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Margaret, that's a very serious decision. Can I ask what prompted this?" I thought about how to explain it without sounding vindictive or petty. "Let's just say I've learned some things about my family that have changed my perspective on inheritance." "I see," Robert said carefully. "Would you like to schedule an appointment to discuss this? Today, if possible. I have an opening at 2 o'clock. I'll be there. I spent the morning walking through my house, seeing it differently than I ever had before. Not as the home where I had raised my family, but as the asset that Stephanie was so eager to inherit. Not as the place where David had taken his first steps, but as the property they planned to renovate and modernize once I was out of the way. Every room told a story, but apparently those stories didn't matter to the people I had written them for. In the living room, I looked at the mantle where I displayed family photos, David's graduation pictures, his wedding photos, pictures of Emma and Jake at various ages. In every family photo from the past 3 years, I noticed something I had never seen before. Stephanie was always positioned at the center, with David and the children arranged around her. I was either on the edge of the frame or missing entirely. She had been erasing me for years, one photo at a time. In the kitchen, I opened the cabinet where I kept my good china. The set had belonged to my mother, and her mother before that. 4 generations of women had used these dishes for special occasions, for family dinners, for moments that mattered. I had always assumed David would want them, that I would pass them down to Emma someday. But David had never shown any interest in family heirlooms. That was something I had projected onto him, the way I had projected so many things. The truth was, Stephanie would probably donate them to charity or sell them at a garage sale the moment I was gone. At 2 o'clock, I sat in Robert's office and told him exactly what I wanted. I want to leave the house to the local children's hospital, I said. They can sell it and use the money for their programs. Robert's eyebrows went up. That's quite generous, Margaret, but are you sure you don't want to leave it to David? I'm very sure. What about your other assets? Your savings account? Your investments? I want to set up a scholarship fund for children who want to study horticulture. Gardening has always brought me joy. Maybe it will bring joy to others. And your personal belongings? Family heirlooms? Jewelry? Photos? I thought about this for a moment. I want to give Emma and Jake each a small trust fund that they can access when they turn 18. Not enough to spoil them, but enough to help them if they need it. As for the rest, I'll donate what has value and keep what matters to me personally. Margaret, Robert said gently, I have to ask, are you doing this because you're angry with David? I considered the question seriously. No, I said finally. I'm doing this because I've realized that the family I thought I was providing for doesn't actually exist. David has made it clear that he doesn't need me or want me in his life, so I'm choosing to invest in people who might actually appreciate what I have to give. This is a very significant change, Robert said. I'd recommend taking some time to think about it. I've been thinking about it for years without realizing it, I said. Every time I was excluded from a decision about my own grandchildren, every time a family tradition was changed without consulting me, every time I was made to feel like a burden in my own family. I was actually thinking about this. Robert nodded slowly. All right, I'll draft the new will, but I want you to understand that once you sign it, this can't easily be undone. I don't want it undone, I said. I want it ironclad. When I got home, there were 2 voicemails on my phone. The first was from Janet. Margaret, I've got great news. I showed the photos to a colleague, and she has clients who might be interested in a quick sale. They're relocating from out of state and need to move fast. Could you be flexible on the closing date? The second voicemail was from David. Hey Mom, just calling to check in. Stephanie wanted me to invite you to dinner this weekend. She feels bad about the misunderstanding on Sunday and wants to clear the air. Call me back. A misunderstanding. That's what they were calling it now. I deleted David's message without calling him back. Then I called Janet. Tell your clients I can close in 2 weeks if they want, I said. I'll be ready. That evening, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Peace. My roses were blooming beautifully, their fragrance filling the evening air. I had spent 5 years nurturing this garden, learning what each plant needed, creating something beautiful from what had once been just an empty yard. Tomorrow, I would start packing. In 2 weeks, I would sign papers that would transfer ownership of this house to strangers. And somewhere in between, I would tell David and Stephanie that their inheritance was gone. Not because I was angry, though I certainly was. Not because I wanted revenge, though the thought was satisfying, but because I had finally learned the difference between being generous and being taken advantage of. I had spent 40 years giving everything I had to a family that was planning to discard me. Now I was going to give everything I had to people who would actually benefit from it. The children at the hospital would never know my name, but they would benefit from the sale of my house. The young people who received scholarships would never meet me, but they would be able to pursue their dreams because of my savings. And David and Stephanie would learn that counting on someone else's death to improve your life is a very dangerous game, especially when that someone is still very much alive and finally ready to play by her own rules. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday morning. I watched from my kitchen window as Janet's assistant hammered it into my front lawn, and I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. This house had been my world for 40 years, but it had also become my prison. I knew it wouldn't take long for the news to spread. Our neighborhood was full of people who noticed everything and talked about it even more. By lunchtime, my phone was ringing. Margaret? It was Mrs. Patterson from next door, her voice high with curiosity. I just saw the sign in your yard. Are you really selling? Yes, I am. But why? I mean, where will you go? I'm not sure yet, I said, which was true. I had been so focused on getting away from this situation that I hadn't given much thought to where I was going. I'm looking at some options. Does David know? The question I had been dreading. Not yet. There was a pause, and I could practically hear Mrs. Patterson's wheels turning. This was going to be the talk of the neighborhood within the hour. Well, she said finally, I'm sure you know what you're doing. By 3 o'clock, I had received 6 more calls from neighbors and 3 from people I barely knew who had somehow heard the news. Small towns didn't have secrets, only delayed announcements. My phone rang again at 4:30. This time it was David. Mom, he said, and I could hear the confusion and panic in his voice. Mrs. Henderson just called Stephanie. She said there's a for sale sign in your yard. Please tell me she's mistaken. She's not mistaken. Silence. Then, what do you mean she's not mistaken? I mean I'm selling the house, David. You're selling the house, he repeated, like he was trying to make sense of a foreign language. Why? Because it's my house, and I can do what I want with it. But Mom, this is the family home. This is where I grew up. Where Emma and Jake come for holidays. Where Emma and Jake come for holidays. Not where Emma and Jake come to see their grandmother. Where they come for the house itself. Actually, I said, according to Stephanie, they won't be coming here for holidays anymore. Christmas is going to be peaceful without me. Remember? Another silence. Mom, we've talked about this. That was a misunderstanding, was it? Because I found some text messages that suggest otherwise. I heard his sharp intake of breath. What text messages? The ones on your old phone. The one you left here last month. Very interesting reading. David, you went through my phone? His voice cracked like it used to when he was a teenager caught in a lie. Your old phone that you abandoned in my house, yes. And I learned quite a bit about what you and Stephanie really think of me. Mom, you don't understand the context of those messages. What context? David? The context where Stephanie calls me a lonely old woman? The context where you discuss convincing me to move to a senior community so you can have my house? The context where you plan to cut me out of holidays and family events because it's your turn to be the center of attention? Each word I spoke seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Those conversations were taken out of context. Were they? Which part was out of context? The part where Stephanie said I need to find my own life instead of living through yours? Or the part where you agreed that I've had 40 years to be the center of attention and now it's time for me to step back? I never said that. Actually, you did. You said I seemed sad but resigned, and that you thought I was starting to understand that it was time to step back. Your exact words, David. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Where are you going to live? I'll figure that out. And what about our family traditions? What about Christmas? What about Sunday brunches? What about them? According to you and Stephanie, I'm not welcome at Christmas anymore. And I'm certainly not going to continue hosting Sunday brunches for people who see me as a burden. You're not a burden, Mom. Really? Because Stephanie seems to think I am. She told you that hosting family events is a burden I shouldn't have to carry anymore. She said Christmas would be peaceful without me there to worry about cooking and stress. Those were her words, David. And you agreed with her. I was trying to be supportive of my wife, at the expense of your mother. It's not that simple. Actually, it is exactly that simple. You had to choose between supporting your wife's desire to exclude me and standing up for your mother. You chose Stephanie. That's your right. But it's also my right to make my own choices. So you're selling the house to punish us? The question made me angry in a way I hadn't expected. Punish you? David, this house was going to be your inheritance. But inheritance implies that you value what you're inheriting. You and Stephanie don't value this house or what it represents. You just want to own it. There's a difference. Of course we value it. Do you? Because Stephanie's messages talked about renovating it completely and making it modern. She wants to erase everything that makes this house what it is, just like she's been erasing me from your family. That's not fair. What's not fair is spending 3 years systematically excluding me from my own family, and then expecting me to leave you everything when I die. What's not fair is making plans for my house while I'm still living in it. What's not fair is calling me a lonely old woman behind my back while pretending to care about my feelings to my face. I heard a woman's voice in the background. Stephanie telling David to put the phone on speaker. Margaret, Stephanie's voice came through the line, syrupy, sweet as always. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding. Stephanie, I understand perfectly. Those text messages were private conversations between a husband and wife. We were working through some family dynamics. Family dynamics, I repeated. Is that what you call plotting to exclude me from holidays and planning to inherit my house? We would never plot against you. You called me a lonely old woman. I was frustrated. We all say things we don't mean when we're frustrated. Do we? Because you seem to mean it quite clearly. You also seem to mean it when you told David that Christmas needed to be about your family, not catering to me. When you said I'd had my time being the center of attention. When you said it was time for me to find my own life. There was silence on the other end of the line. The house will be sold within 2 weeks, I continued. The new owners are lovely people with young children. I think they'll be very happy here. Mom, David's voice was pleading now. Please don't do this. We can work things out. There's nothing to work out, David. You've made your feelings clear. Both of you have. I'm simply responding accordingly. What do you want from us? Stephanie asked, and for the first time her voice had lost its sweet tone. She sounded angry. I don't want anything from you, I said. That's the point. I don't want to be where I'm not wanted. I don't want to fight for a place in my own family. I don't want to pretend that being excluded from Christmas is somehow a kindness. I'm too old and too tired to play those games. So you're just going to disappear? David asked. I'm going to live my life on my own terms. Something I should have started doing a long time ago. I hung up before either of them could respond. 20 minutes later, David's car pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I could see him and Stephanie sitting in the front seats, having what looked like an intense conversation. Finally, they got out and walked to my front door. I let them ring the doorbell twice before I answered. We need to talk, David said. I think we've said everything we need to say. Please, Mom, just let us come in. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let them into the living room, where 40 years of memories lived in photo frames and furniture arrangements. Stephanie looked around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. And maybe she was. Maybe she had never really looked at it before, only calculated its value. We don't want you to sell the house, David said. I know you don't. Then why are you doing this? I looked at my son, this man I had loved more than my own life, and felt something settle into place inside me. Because, David, you taught me that love is supposed to be unconditional, but apparently that only applies when I'm the one doing the loving. The house sold in 8 days. The young couple who bought it had 2 small children and a golden retriever, and when they walked through my rooms, I could see them imagining their family growing up here. They saw birthday parties in the backyard and Christmas mornings in the living room. They saw what this house was meant to be, a home for people who loved each other. I felt good about leaving it to them. David and Stephanie tried everything to stop the sale. First came the angry phone calls, then the guilt trips, then the threats to cut off my access to my grandchildren. When none of that worked, they showed up at my door with Emma and Jake, hoping the sight of the children would change my mind. Grandma, Emma said, her eyes wide with confusion, Daddy says you're giving our house to strangers. I knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in mine. Sweetheart, this was never your house. This was my house. And now I'm sharing it with a family that has little children, just like you. But where will we have Christmas? Jake asked. You'll have Christmas wherever your mommy and daddy decide to have it, I said gently. And it will be wonderful. Over Emma's head, I met Stephanie's eyes. She was watching me carefully, probably trying to gauge whether I was weakening. The children are confused, she said. They don't understand why you're doing this. The children are confused because you told them this house belonged to them, I replied, but it never did. It belonged to me. After they left, I continued packing. 40 years of accumulation takes time to sort through, but I found the process liberating rather than overwhelming. Each item I boxed up or donated was another weight lifted from my shoulders. I kept the truly important things. My wedding album, some of my mother's jewelry, a few pieces of furniture that held real meaning. But most of it went to charity. The china set that Stephanie would have sold went to a young couple starting their marriage. The books went to the local library. The linens and household items went to a women's shelter. Everything found a home where it would be appreciated. The closing was on a Friday morning. I signed papers for an hour, handed over the keys, and walked out of the lawyer's office with a check that represented 4 decades of building a life. That afternoon, I drove to the storage unit where I had placed my few remaining possessions and loaded them into my car. Then I drove west, toward a future I hadn't planned, but was ready to embrace. I had spent weeks researching retirement communities, not the institutional kind that Stephanie had suggested, but active adult communities where people my age were starting new chapters instead of ending old ones. I found one in Arizona, near Sedona, where the desert landscape was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The apartment I rented was small, but filled with light. It had a patio where I could start a new garden, and windows that framed red rock formations instead of suburban streets. For the first time in decades, I woke up each morning with no one to cook for, no one to worry about, no schedule to maintain except my own. I joined a hiking group for seniors and discovered muscles I had forgotten I had. I took a pottery class and learned that my hands, which had spent years caring for others, were also capable of creating beautiful things for myself. I volunteered at a local animal shelter and found that puppies don't care about family drama or inheritance disputes. They just want someone to scratch behind their ears and tell them they're good dogs. 3 months after I moved, I received a letter from David. Not a text message or a voicemail, but an actual handwritten letter. "Mom," it began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I've had time to think about everything that happened, and I realize that Stephanie and I treated you terribly. We took you for granted, and we excluded you from decisions that affected your own life. I was so focused on keeping peace in my marriage that I forgot about keeping peace with my mother. Stephanie and I are having problems. She's angry that you sold the house and she blames me for not stopping you. She says I should have fought harder to make you see reason. But the truth is, I think you did see reason. I think you saw that we were planning a life that didn't include you, and you decided to plan a life that didn't include us. I miss you. The kids ask about you all the time. Emma keeps asking when we're going to visit you in your new house. And I don't know what to tell her because I don't even know where you live. I know I don't deserve a response to this letter, but if you're willing to give me your address, I'd like to send Emma and Jake letters from you. Not for me or Stephanie, but for them. They loved you in a way that had nothing to do with houses or inheritance, and I hate that they lost their grandmother because of our mistakes. I hope you're happy wherever you are. I hope you're building the life you deserve. David." I read the letter 3 times, sitting on my patio as the sun set behind the red rocks. Part of me felt satisfaction that David was finally seeing the truth about his marriage and his choices. Part of me felt sad that it had taken losing me for him to realize what he had lost. But mostly, I felt at peace. I wrote back to David, but not to reconcile. I sent him my address and told him that Emma and Jake were welcome to write to me, and that I would write back. I told him about my new life, about the pottery class and the hiking group, and the garden I was planning for spring. I didn't tell him that he was welcome to visit. I didn't tell him that I forgave him. I didn't tell him that there was a path back to the relationship we used to have. Because there wasn't. Some relationships can be repaired after betrayal. Others can only be replaced with something new and different. David would have to earn his way back into my life if that was even possible, and it would take more than a letter and some marital problems to make that happen. 6 months later, I received my first letter from Emma. It was written in careful second-grade handwriting and decorated with crayon drawings of flowers. "Dear Grandma," it said, "I miss you. Daddy says you live near Big Red Rocks. I would like to see the red rocks someday. Are you happy? I hope you are happy. Love, Emma." I wrote back immediately, telling her about the rocks and the desert flowers and the roadrunners that visited my patio each morning. I sent her pictures and pressed flowers from my hikes. She wrote back 2 weeks later, and our correspondence began. Jake started writing too, and slowly, carefully, I began building new relationships with my grandchildren. Not the same relationships we had before, when I was part of their daily lives, but different ones. Ones based on letters and photographs and small gifts sent through the mail. Ones that belonged only to us, with no interference from their parents. A year later, David called to tell me that he and Stephanie were getting divorced. "She never got over the house," he said. "She blamed me for not fighting harder to keep it. She said I chose you over our marriage." "Did you?" I asked. "I tried to choose both," he said, "but I realize now that I should have chosen you a long time ago." I didn't tell him that it was too late for that choice to matter. I didn't tell him that I was happier without him than I had been with him. I didn't tell him that his divorce was just confirmation of what I had always known, that Stephanie had never loved our family, only what she thought she could gain from it. Instead, I told him I was sorry he was going through a difficult time, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want him to suffer. I just didn't want to be responsible for preventing his suffering anymore. "Would you be willing to see the kids sometime?" he asked. "They miss you. Send them for a week next summer," I said. "If they want to come." They did want to come. Emma and Jake spent a week with me in Arizona, hiking and swimming and learning to make pottery. They met my friends, played with the shelter dogs, and helped me plant vegetables in my garden. On their last night, as we sat on the patio watching the stars appear in the desert sky, Emma asked me a question that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. "Grandma, are you lonely without us?" I thought about how to answer honestly without burdening her with adult problems. Sometimes I miss you, I said finally. But I'm not lonely. I have friends here, and I have hobbies that make me happy. And I have letters from you and Jake, which always make me smile. Good, she said, snuggling closer to me. I want you to be happy. I am happy, sweetheart. I'm very happy. And for the first time in years, that was completely true. I had lost a family that never really valued me, but I had gained a life that was entirely my own. I had given up being needed by people who took me for granted, and I had discovered being wanted by people who chose to include me. At 70 years old, I had finally learned the difference between being loved and being used, and that knowledge had set me free.